Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AIQRATE Webinar Specials CXO Series. Today we have Divesh Singla, Vice President Regulatory and Access Parexel, with us to discuss on the topic Reimagine Healthcare with AI, Possibilities and Beyond. This session will be moderated by Dhanrajani, CEO and co-founder, AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting. Before the session, some housekeeping rules. Request all to be on mute throughout the webinar. Leave your questions in the chat window for us to take them up for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, and you can check the playback video on our website, www.aiqrate.ai. Now I would like to introduce Divesh. Divesh is a life sciences leader driving build of global capabilities in advanced analytics, data sciences, commercial research, access, and health economics and outcomes research. He has been leading offshoring roadmaps, strategic investments for large life sciences organizations, and has been instrumental in incubating and scaling up of large enterprise-level commercial analytics and data sciences teams for these companies, including IQVIA, Indigene, and WNS. Divesh is currently Vice President and Global Head, Health Economics and Outcomes Research for Parexel Access Consulting. He leads an international team covering all aspects of health economics modeling, evidence evaluations, advanced analytics, and outcomes research. He is responsible for the overall strategy, expansion, and commercial growth. Divesh is a member at Wiley Innovation Advisory Council for AI Analytics and Emerging Technologies. He is a member at NASSCOM Future Skills Industry Task Force, a council member of Indian Society for Clinical Research Council. Divesh, pleasure to have you in our CXO webinar specials today. Thanks for making time. I'll now hand over the session to Samir. Samir, over to you.
Thanks, Nanda. Thanks, NK. Divesh, excited to get you on board for this CXO. For many of the participants who are not aware, Divesh and me have shared stage and platform at many occasions as part of some of the interactions we have done for the external world. But for the first time, I think we are face to face, and I happen to play the role of a kind of a, let's say, moderator, more like a facilitator, and having Divesh doing more of the talk. I think the topic and theme per se is exciting, specifically in the time of this pandemic and COVID, what we're talking about. And I think that itself, it's a big, I would say, platform in terms of kind of talking about this whole aspect of how artificial intelligence is impacting healthcare, how it would impact healthcare in the time to come. And more so ever, I think there is a linkage today, and the linkage is more important in terms of how today there are new developments, topical kind of, let's say, viewpoints which are happening on the healthcare side, and how it can actually be more kind of bolstered using and leveraging artificial intelligence. But first thing first, Divesh, I want to take a quick viewpoint about this current scenario, COVID. Now, definitely it's hit us hard in terms of coming without any cautions, and everything went tipsy-turvy. Now, when we analyze these last 4-5 months scenario, enough has been said and enough has been quoted around what could have been done, what should have been done. And healthcare systems, first, we've seen taking a big crumbling kind of a, let's say, scenario. The whole aspect about patient care regime has gone for a toss because the hospital inadequate in terms of taking care because of the kind of a deficit of the beds. And third is, in the whole aspect of the vaccine and the treatment is far away. Yeah. What's your view? I mean, if you think in terms of what's happened in the last 3-4 months and the current situation, what's your view about this whole situation?
Sure. No, first of all, thank you for having me here, Samir. Thanks, NK, for that generous introduction. I'll just put a disclaimer that, all that we discussed today, it's pretty much representation of my own views and Parexel has nothing to do with this. So I just want to indemnify Parexel from anything that I say today. Coming to the question, Sameer, I think there are a lot of narratives that we have around in terms of, as you said, how data could have been used better, how we can forecast, predict the uptake of the infection in this pandemic. I would want to take a slightly different view. As per my understanding, as per my view, if at all this pandemic is teaching us anything, it should be the need for a preventive approach to healthcare. And I'll pretty much stick to the healthcare narrative here. I mean, this is a pandemic which has affected more than 3.5 million people worldwide. I mean, it's almost killed we're hitting almost 500,000 kind of, mortality rate out here. And, if I think about it very logically, a health system we use, or we only use when we are already sick, and showing symptoms not only means, more suffering for those affected, but costs more, whether it's coronavirus or any other diseases, so any other pandemic that we may speak about. I think widespread use of telemedicine would be the way, to learn from the recent experiences. And I'm going more futuristic here. I think retrospective narratives are something that we are hearing from almost everyone at this point in time. Despite the growing interest, the potential of telemedicine being a key contributor to healthcare and medical research, I don't think that has been fully explored yet. Technology nowadays, provides more possibilities than ever to monitor health parameters through wearables. We're talking about wearables like Apple Watch, which offers, oximetry measurement, the parameter that evaluates the percentage of oxygen saturation of hemoglobin in the blood, which can be used to assess amongst many other things, the possible incidence of respiratory disease, such as COVID-19, the pandemic that we are speaking about. If we add, to that, the improvement of the capabilities of existing sensors to evaluate not only the possible atrial fibrillation, and I'm using some of these medical jargons, but just to kind of underscore the importance of monitoring and how this monitoring could have or could play a very important role as we move into the era of newer pandemics. And by the way, I mean, it's not only about Apple and Apple Watch. It's, we have a lot of other organizations, a lot of other companies, who are working in this space. We talk about a company by the name of Cardia, which is used for EKG every day. It's for blood pressure monitoring. We're talking about Samsung. The devices from Samsung have already been approved by South Korean health authorities. Fitbit, it's working with scripts to detect infections. So I think one of the most important learning that I believe we should be taking is around preventive healthcare. Obviously the supply of healthcare, the delivery of healthcare is very important, but it's more about preventive healthcare, which I believe will be leading to a lot of learning from what we are seeing from COVID pandemic.
So sticking on to the same point and question, in the hindsight, do you think in our own backyard, India, if patient data records would have been linked, this would have been a different scenario for the government to really kind of ensure that the treatment and the care is much more prompt and swift as opposed to the current situation?
Yeah, so let me invoke a bit of data sciences here in this conversation. Now, when we talk about the availability of data, when we talk about all these patient records, which could be patient visits, doctor consultations, diagnosis related data, all that could have been used. Now, what I'm referring to is having an effective lake of data, which can be deployed in an agile manner, wherein we are infusing new data, which is related to COVID-19. And this data could have been used, to undertake forecasting of the pandemic growth, which could have informed the policy decisions and optimization of public health, recommendations for reopening of the lockdown situation. So I'm just taking a particular example out here on how, as you said, the data analytics infrastructure could have allowed us deal with the current pandemic, and I'm particularly referring to lockdown situation and how we come out of this lockdown situation much more effectively. This would have helped us inform, okay, how do we unlock ourselves? At this point in time, we see, as an example, Delhi, Mumbai, all these four metros, being unlocked in different ways. I don't think there is thought going in to look at the hotspots, the potential hotspots, and do we have the right kind of healthcare infrastructure on those in those hotspots for us to be able to manage if in case we see a sudden influx of the patients. And that's what we are seeing. Delhi opened up and we saw a sudden influx of patients coming up, and now struggling. We are talking about almost 500,000 patients coming in with a hospital bed capacity of about 30,000, or now I think it's gone up to 60,000 in Delhi. So yes, to your point, if we would have had that infrastructure, and I'm talking about analytical data, technology infrastructure, we would have been in a different situation than what we are as of today.
Sure. No, I think that's a good point, what you said. But let me take a swing in terms of the conversation on the other side. I think when we talk about in the last 4 years, a lot has happened in terms of, I would say, all the industry segments going for a big change. One, we've all realized that the customer preferences have changed big time. I think there is whole curiosity in terms of a customer preference. Hey, what's in for me? Personalization. Second is the value chain of the businesses have gone for a complete, I would say, deconstruction. I mean, if we take, let's say, the parallels from the life science or banking or, let's say, manufacturing, other industries, it's just getting very, very deconstructed. And the third is there is a great deal in terms of what we call today rapid experimentation of new innovative product and services, which means that innovations and product, happens on the fly. Now, if you look at the context of healthcare, Devesh, and which is what I want you to kind of download to our audience, what in the last few years have been the trends and topical scenarios in the healthcare industry per se?
Sure. So again, I'll present a different narrative here, a different thought process. I will talk about essentially 3 or 4 things. One is the personalized medicine, and that's a concept that has been there for a while now. I think a lot of focus is being laid over the last few years because of technological advances that we are making, because of the advancements that we are making in genetics. What personalized medicine essentially implies is that the healthcare can be customized based upon DNA information or other genome features. And this ushers a whole new era of the way the healthcare procedures will be defined. The second aspect that I would speak about is the patient connections, the closer patient connections. Every pharmaceutical company, every healthcare entity is talking about patient engagement. A greater focus on the patient gives way to valuable real world data and insights into therapy performance and medication adherence. Enhancing patient engagement means creating opportunities for closer connections. This includes opening the lines of communication, advice, resources into the into what we call as supporting the patients through the duration of the participation. And this has also evolved the way the clinical trials are being run. So healthcare industry as a whole across different stakeholder subsets are recognizing the importance of these closer patient connections much more than ever. Every narrative that we see these days is all full of, people use the words patient centricity, patient closeness, patient engagement. Patient has suddenly become the center of the conversation, and somewhere physicians, doctors have moved away, and they've been replaced by the patients.
So foundationally, if I just chime in, can you explain, and I think this is more for some of the audience who are not much tuned to the healthcare, the way we kind of put a great emphasis in terms of client centricity on the services, this whole patient centricity you talked about works in the healthcare side?
So, let me take an example, and this is an anecdotal example from one of the organizations that I've worked with in the past. How we created this entire value chain, from a patient centricity perspective. And I'm not going to speak about, from a drug development standpoint. I mean, there's a lot of patient centricity related stuff that is going on from a drug development, wherein the clinical trials, often we used to see that the patients were expected to come to the site of the clinical trial and get their monitoring, of the various parameters done. Now, the clinical trials are being taken to the patients, so that a patient does not have to travel 2 hours just to get their blood pressure monitored. So that's one part of the, of the spectrum within healthcare that we're talking about. The other part of the spectrum, which I have again been very closely involved is, I was involved in creating what is called as a connected patient hub. So what it really means is, visualize the patient to be in the center. Now, the company that I worked with, for one of our customers, we created a call center. Now, this is a centralized point of support, which patient is being provided, and we are going beyond the pill now. So the pharmaceutical company is not only talking about, delivering that pill or that injection to the patient. They are now talking about the entire value chain of the service. So the call centers, are being created, which are, or we created that, and this was used to coordinate with other, some of the other processes, that are required for us to be able to engage with the patients. Then we also developed a patient app, which helped us in tracking and management of the symptoms, of the moods, the biometrics of the patient. It's these patient apps also kind of push out easy to understand visualizations. We used these patient apps for a lot of patient education and support. We also used this app to consolidate a lot of electronic health record and electronic medical record data, and very importantly, streamlined these apps by sharing it with the HCPs, and I'll come to that in a second. The third component with regards to this patient hub was all about content, personalized content that was being pushed out to the patients depending upon their, user behavior, to further enhance the patient experience and the patient education. The fourth component is a care team app that was developed. Now, care team app is something that you install with the care team, which includes your healthcare professionals, and the caregivers. Now, this helped us to consolidate the patient information, number one, the visualizations or the insights that allowed the HCPs to get deeper insights on the patient, and we also created a patient dashboard, for the HCP. So if I am visiting an HCP, I have that dashboard as an HCP in front of me. Okay, what is Divesh? What has he been doing? How many hours did he work out for? What was he eating over the last 15 days? What kind of other exercises or activities he's been involved on? So that was the fourth component. So, and then, we had this patient connect, patient insights. So what I'm trying to say is there's a whole value chain, if you see, that was created, and which goes beyond delivery of that medicine. So which involved safety, which involved efficacy. A lot of it helped us to increase the adherence, meaning patients taking the dosage as per the regimen that they're supposed to take it. So that was I mean, I hope I was able to kind of visualize it, for the audience here on what a connected patient hub could look like or did look like.
Sure, no, absolutely. I think that was good. You mentioned about personalized medicine kind of thing. Otsuka, one of pharmaceutical manufacturer in Japan, I think, filed a kind of a digital drug which was approved by FDA. What happened to that? And can you explain some of the developments happening in that space on the personalized medicine?
So this was about, so we are in 2020. This was about 2.5 years back when Otsuka came out with their first electronic pill. And essentially, this electronic pill, now it was, I would say it was a bit different from personalized medicine, so to say, Samir. It was more about, how the patient data could be collected, how some of those adherence related aspects could be collected, basically collecting that data, from once the pill is ingested by the patient, and how the ADME, which is absorption, digestion, metabolism, and excretion, the how that kind of works. So once that data got collected, that's where all that data was now being deployed to understand the metabolic function of the patient, which was then coupled with, or is being coupled with, the genetic coding, or the genetics, the genomics data that is being collected from across different patients. And that is kind of leading to what we call as personalized medicine, which is all about, how I can customize your treatment based on your body functions, genetic setup, and not really use that one size fits all kind of a treatment approach that we are using as of today. Uh, a lot of advancement seems to be made in the space of cancer treatment, oncology as we call it. I mean, cancer, immunology are the two therapy areas where personalized medicine is making a lot of advancement, as compared to some of the more chronic diseases like diabetes, or some of the other ones.
So if you just kind of stick to this personalized medicine, you said about this whole configuration of looking at different parameters to make that particular drug specific or personalized for you. But what happens in terms of a mass production for the uninitiated? I mean, then a population size of 7.5 billion, how does they take into consideration this personalized drug?
So again, let me take a shot at it, Samir. I mean, when we talk about uh, the concept of taking the personalized medicine to the masses, see out here, is my understanding, it's about how we are able to incorporate the entire concept of genetics into the treatment, right? I mean, in terms of assessment and treatment of disorders. The gene technology is also enabling the researchers, to identify these genomic sequences that predict the disorders in humans and animals. I mean, we are talking about humans here. There are experiments which are going on in this arena, from a gene editing perspective that can potentially prevent a lot of diseases. It's also about, identifying diseases which are being inherited, from mother to the child, for example. So these are the kind of studies which are, which are increasingly on rise, which is kind of then feeding into this entire concept of personalized medicine. So it's, I wouldn't necessarily view this as, let's say just from the context of the pill, the e-pill that Otsuka produced. I think I would be rather viewing it how well we are able to bring all this genomic data together, all this body function, metabolic function related data together, and how we are able to utilize that data on the different cohorts of the patients for us to be able to diagnose, assess, and treat them.
Sure, sure. So let's switch to the theme. In fact, that's where I think the rubber hits the road. Specific interventions about AI in healthcare. I think what it will be good for our audience also to kind of really dissect. Let's talk about one, the current state, what's happening in terms of AI in healthcare, and let's also take in this latter part of the conversation about the sneak peek into how the future looks like when AI meets healthcare. Specifically on the current situation, I think you mentioned a great deal on the whole aspect about patient kind of a care or the care management side. Let's start with kind of this whole aspect of how artificial intelligence is influencing the care management. And maybe then we take the piece around the triage and the diagnosis part, because that's where all this aspect about X-rays, CT scans, MRIs comes into the picture. And I think there is a revolution happening over there. And feel free to please provide any kind of companies, startups, ventures who are doing great work over there, Divesh.
Sure, sure. So, when we talk about healthcare, and again, for our discussion, I'll rather use AI analytics, everything in
Sure.
one definition, and let's maybe call it out as digital or something like that. So first of all, let's talk about the importance, the kind of prevalence of big data that we've started to see in healthcare. I mean, if we talk about the kind of benefits that this entire big data AI analytics, have been reaping for healthcare, one, we are looking at a very low rate of medical or medication errors. That is being facilitated by AI, by healthcare through patient record analysis, algorithms that can flag inconsistencies between a patient's health and drug prescriptions, alerting the health professionals and patients when there is a potential risk of a medication error. We are also looking at trends over the past few years, wherein this entire space is facilitating preventive care. A high volume of people stepping into emergency rooms. These patients are called as or the recurring patients are called as frequent flyers. I mean, they can account for almost 28 to 30% of the total visits in an emergency room. Some of the advanced machine learning algorithms, analysis are helping us identify these people and create preventive plans to keep them from returning. We're talking about accurate staffing, which is being facilitated by machine learning, data sciences. The predictive analysis could help the hospitals and clinics estimate the future admission rates, and which further helps these facilities allocate the proper staff to deal with the patients. I mean, this is saving a lot of money. Once again, I'm purposely not going into that spectrum of drug development, drug research.
Sure.
Sameer, I mean, let me know if you want me to
So
pull some.
in that viewpoint, how does a doctor, physician kind of starts taking more insights into consideration with this data kind of flowing in?
So again, okay, let me uh, invoke the example of IBM Watson here. So when this entire hype around IBM Watson started, and I'm using the word hype, but it's been realistic to a large extent as well. What IBM Watson really provides, and I'm talking it from a physician's point of view. If I am an oncologist in Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital back in New Jersey, in the US, I have this data right in front of me, which gives me a historical perspective on, what are the kind of patient cohorts, what are the kind of demographic profiles, uh, you know, that the physicians are currently seeing across, or the oncologists are currently seeing across different geographies. Now, all that information is right in front of me. And if a patient, let's say with gastric cancer walks in, I'm able to map, I'm able to match the profile of that patient with the historical profiles that I have available, and how different therapies have worked for those kind of profiles, which is again helping me, and it comes back to a similar kind of conversation around customizing the treatment. So from a physician standpoint, this is one big intervention that is being seen when we talk about all this, AIs, which is basically an umbrella term being used for machine learning, deep learning kind of things. Number one. Number two, I think I read it somewhere today, wherein the facial recognition is being put in place. Now, let me take an example, and Sameer, I think this is an example that we've discussed in the past as well. How for blind patients, there are devices that are being developed, and I think this was by Google, Sensor.ai, which helps the patients to use those, or I'm talking about the blind people, to use those devices, to basically help them carry out their day-to-day activities. So I hope that's kind of in the direction that you were trying to get me in.
Yeah. So also, I think if we take this in a bit, I would say more of a breadth diagnostic area. Radiologists today, when there is often this debate, hey, you're looking at these X-rays, MRIs, which is not your job, and at the same thing, you can use a deep learning algorithms, millions of X-ray, CT scans. What's happening over there from a diagnostic point of view? And I mean, how this also, I want you to reflect, changes the whole nature of the jobs, what these professionals are doing. And these are marquee, revered side of the professions. What happens over there?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely one of the very, very important aspects that we need to take into consideration on how AI is, playing a significant role. And let me, because we are in this, COVID situation, so let me take an example from how AI and AI is playing a role in detection and diagnosis of COVID. So, when we talk about what is the best way of diagnosing COVID, obviously swab tests are one of those aspects. And then the other aspect is CT scan. I was reading a paper by, Yuan Chen, who has developed a deep learning model for detecting corona pneumonia, on a high resolution CT scan, through a prospective study. And there are also examples, wherein Alibaba, for example, they've developed an algorithm which allows the radiologists scan through the CT scan reports, by and in about 20 seconds. And we're talking about a per patient accuracy rate of about 95.24%. We are talking about per image accuracy of about 98.85%, and a decreased reading time by 65%. So on one hand, artificial intelligence, deep learning, it's allowing us to be a bit more precise than what we were. It's helping us gain efficiencies. On an average, a radiologist takes about 15 to 20 minutes to make a reading on a CT scan image, in comparison to, let's take a worst case scenario by an AI algorithm, which is about 4 minutes. The jobs of radiologists are now getting shifted towards more of that, more of engaging with the patients, more of, getting to the depth of understanding of what exactly the disease is, rather than, spending those 15-20 minutes reading through the CT scan report or CT scan image.
Would you say the same thing for a pharmacist or a druggist? I mean, how inaccurately sometimes they kind of look at the whole handwriting prescription of the doctors and say, hey, not making sense. But sometimes errors do happen, end up giving a wrong prescription of medicine. And so that,
I think
also you're saying that it's going for a change.
Oh, indeed, absolutely. I mean, I can invoke a case out here wherein I think this was University of California, if I'm not mistaken. So, which partnered with a local pharmacy out there. This pharmacy chain reported about 7,000 deaths because of wrong prescriptions. And these wrong prescriptions for most of the times were dispensed because the pharmacist who was behind the counter could not read the handwriting in the way that it should have been read. Now, I can always be questioned that in the US you have these electronic prescriptions as well, but we are talking about an average prescription a pharmacy which is not the likes of CVS. So this entity, they deployed robots, who were which were able to read through the prescriptions using the deep learning technologies, and the accuracy of the dispensing error rates have actually been brought down by 93% by deployment of this technology. So yes, I can say that for the pharmacists as well. Is this something which has scaled up completely? No, but we do have a lot of use cases of this being deployed.
Great, great. Variables. There is an intrigue about variables as well as an aura, Divesh. Now, the fact over there is that it's created a segment of its own. And when we talk about variables outside of capturing essential health metrics for an individual, it's also now getting linked in terms of deciding the insurance premium. Also, in terms of how the fintech companies are using that as a part of, saying the credit scoring and profiling of a consumer. Uh, Look at this market, and I want you to kind of, let's say, give a peep into to our audience how this whole artificial intelligence surrounds the variable, and what are the different use cases, which really gives a very different meaning to this entire category.
Sure. So, see, wearables is definitely one of the significant trends, one of the most prominent trends that we are looking at when we start talking about digital transformation of healthcare. We are talking about, this was a recent report that I went through, which kind of assessed the wearable medical device market, to be reaching more than $27 million in 2023. From $8 million, what was seen in 2017. So in a span of about 6 years, the market has already tripled up. Now, the most common devices that we see these days are heart rate sensors, exercise trackers, sweat meters, oximeters. I spoke about Apple Watch. But then there are benefits which are much beyond these. As you said, it helps us personalize the entire healthcare experience. It gives that sense of ownership to the patients in the process of improving their health. It helps us target the insurance pricing, as you picked up. Information obtained from wearable devices can help insurers more accurately define the patient's risk for illness. It also allows us bring incentives from an insurance perspective. Patients who are taking preventive measures to improve their health can obtain lower insurance premiums. And very, very importantly, it provides us with those gamification opportunities. Some medical devices, such as fitness watches, can create competitive goals for the users to achieve, through exercise, diet, nutrition. So, the entire wearable technology is helping the healthcare companies, to further penetrate into that entire patient engagement, patient closeness model. One of the studies found that health apps and wearables, for preventive or preventative care, could save only US healthcare system close to about $7 billion. So again, all this is being AI, machine learning is all underlying this entire wearable technology. And more than that, some of the technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality, they are facilitating uptake of this entire wearable trend quite significantly. I'll just take an example out here. A group of hospitals in England, and this is something I was reading, were equipped with patients, to be discharged with Wi-Fi enabled armbands that allowed, remote monitoring of vitals like oxygen levels, respiratory rates, and so on. This program aimed at integrating artificial intelligence to analyze the patient data, and had reported that the rate of patients adhering to treatment plans had actually jumped to 96%. So this is the kind of penetration of AI that we are seeing into healthcare through variables. I can certainly give another example. I'm just conscious of time. If we are fine, there's this German AI company called as AI Serve that has combined wearable hardware and computer vision with AI and location service to devise a mechanism or a system that acquires data to help people navigate safely through streets and neighborhoods. So yes, I mean, and this is typically used in, for the patients who have anxiety related disorders, some of these serious conditions which are much more psychological and mental in nature.
Interesting. I remember a project we did for Disney in my previous organization, and as you know, for the entry into the amusement park, you have to wear a band, and band became these bands became very what I would call variable kind of a bands with all those essential kind of gigs lined up over there as part of doing some analytics over there. And what happened, one of the use cases we were toying, and which was a request from the hospital that how we can share those health metrics of the people who are walking into the amusement parks and kind of ensure that it's tied up. So you can't kind of really have this scenario where on one side you're going to the hospital saying I'm sick, and on the other side you're taking a stroll in the amusement park kind of a thing. But at some level, again, these are privacy thresholds and scenarios where there is a bit of resistance around how it can be done. Any of AI in healthcare where blockchain is also getting embedded as part of the intervention?
Absolutely. I mean, blockchain is kind of facilitating the promise of what we call as better healthcare records. If we look at it, the healthcare and the pharmaceutical companies, are already vouching for the efficiency of blockchain by investing millions of dollars in it. I mean, blockchain is proven to be an effective tool in preventing data breaches, as most of us on this call would agree to. I mean, it's helping healthcare improve a lot of accuracy from a medical records perspective as well. Medical data, is currently being recorded in unstructured formats and stretched across multiple EHR or electronic health record systems. We know that we are short-staffed on doctors, nurses, who are struggling to manually log in every piece of information. And this also leads to huge amount of errors, in terms of duplicate medical records, misdiagnosis, delayed treatments, and so on. Some of the countries like Australia, UK, they've started to experiment with blockchain technology to manage, medical records and transactions amongst patients, healthcare providers, and insurance companies. And thanks to a decentralized network of computing technology that we have, that handle blockchain and simultaneously register every transaction. Conflicting information is automatically detected. Records are not only 100% accurate, but also very hard to hack. In the US, regulations make it hard for companies to create blockchain-based EHRs. Some of the startups like Medical Chain, however, are making quite a big strides towards future where patients will control their health electronic health records from an app. Where doctors, pharmacists, or health insurers will be requesting information, or permission, for them to be able to access the data of the patients, where all transactions will be recorded through a distributed ledger. I mean, this is something we've been having as a conversation in our own organization, and we are doing something in this direction already. But significant intrusion, if I use that word, of blockchain happening in maintenance of EHR.
Wonderful. So at the same time, Divesh, you mentioned about some of these geographies looking at their own scenarios in terms of how they operate. And I just want to infuse this with a question we have, and it's pertinent in terms of what you mentioned. Because any kind of a use case or interventions of AI in healthcare, whether it's for the US or let's say UK or let's say even EU and Asia Pac, will have different regulations, different privacy, and different kind of, let's say, parameters. How does one take into consideration that? Because it's seemingly clear it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
So what's your viewpoint over there?
So, and I'm assuming we are talking about health data privacy kind of topics out here.
And also
Uh,
some of these like variables, data sharing, and other some of these scenarios as well, which are pretty much on the privacy side of the
yeah.
aspect.
So, I mean, there is an ongoing debate. There's an ongoing discussion in terms of what kind of data is being collected through the variables, through EHRs, EMRs, and who is using that data. You know, see, we have different laws. We have California Act in the US. You know, we have GDPR in the EU. Then
EU.
China coming up. China has already come up with their data privacy. So yes, one is every geography, every country are coming up with their own data privacy laws, which are, by the way, I mean, I should definitely talk about GDPR, very, very stringent,
Hmm.
very well-defined roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders. And it's not easy. It's not easy to breach GDPR. I'm currently working on a project, wherein we are required to collect health records for a set of patients in a particular therapy area, for us to be able to generate that real world evidence, which will inform on what kind of clinical trial protocol, inclusion and exclusion criteria we should be working with. And it is, although I'm calling it out as a nightmare because I am dealing with these data privacy laws currently, but it is not a nightmare if I think of it from a from a patient perspective, whose data I'm collecting. So it's helping us harmonize the approaches. Yes, I wish that we have a more consistent, more common framework of data privacy across geographies, rather than having one California Act in US or GDPR in EU. So, I mean, that's what my take is. It's an evolving discussion, Samir. It's an evolving, you know, part of this entire AI. We can talk about explainable AI element as well. You know, the black box component that is there on in a lot of algorithms. That's another part of the debate. I mean, but FDA has been doing a lot of work. I would commend the amount of work which FDA is doing, especially on the medical device side of it. Uh, I mean, they've come up with regulations. They came up with regulations in, uh, my memory is not helping me out. I think it was in August 2019 or August 2018. What should be, and medical devices are, AI algorithms are now being considered as medical devices in some of the cases.
Nice, nice. So let's take a brush, Devesh, which is towards our last segment around sneak peek into the future. Let's run this hypothesis of a Blade Runner 2049. First thing first, I think we've seen a tremendous consolidation also in this whole aspect of a lot of these technology behemoths, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, taking a very keen interest in healthcare.
Yeah.
I think that's one sector which I think they cannot ignore. First of all, would like to understand if you would like to give some scenarios. I mean, what are these guys up to? I mean, covertly or kind of, let's say, openly.
Sure.
And second, give us a picture around how does this healthcare leveraging AI looks like in 3 years, 5 years from now. Take a punt, be speculative, be kind of more recommended. Would love kind of having you talk
Sure.
about this.
Absolutely. And we can have a conversation on for hours, Samir. But let me take a step, a stab in terms of what the Amazons and the Googles of the world are doing. If we look
Mhm.
at some of the uh, tangible, use cases that have come out from these organizations, Amazon is pretty much focused on what we say healthcare delivery. They are not currently into diagnostics. They are not currently into discovery, development. No, they are pretty much into healthcare delivery, and that's what they're focusing upon. How can they help in terms of delivering healthcare? Uh, Walmart, for a change, has come significant. I mean, they are tying up, with some of the large pharmacy chains in the U.S. They have what they call as Walmart Health, and they are trying to get all the data under their belt, which will help them understand this entire landscape. We spoke about EHRs, EMRs, and the applicability of the same. Google is big on diagnostics. Google is doing a lot of work in the space of ophthalmology. A lot of diagnostic algorithms that they're building, that they're creating, which are being deployed, whether that is for age-related macular degeneration, AMD. So a lot of work being done by Google from a diagnostics perspective as well.
But Channing, and I'm sorry because you touched on it, do you also see AI then getting more specifics into what I call different healthcare segments, oncology, ophthalmology, diabetic retinopathy? Do you think that it will just permeate and really kind of go deep into calling out for solutions?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I'll take the example of Google, wherein they are developing. I mean, they're already trying it out. The retinal technology, which will allow diagnosis of a diabetic patient without having to prick the needle into your finger. I mean, through the retina itself. They are working with companies like Eli Lilly, on treatments related to Alzheimer's, on treatment related to schizophrenia. So there are different therapy areas, so diabetes is definitely one, cancer treatment is another, ophthalmology is yet another, all these neurological disorders are another. So these are some of those, therapy areas which are finding a huge amount of entry from some of these technological companies which are now getting converted into healthcare organizations. Microsoft is working with almost every big pharma company deploying their cloud solutions, Azure, and they're kind of helping the organizations to make their data environments much more consistent, when we talk about this entire MDM, master data management part of it. So that was the first part to your question, Samir, in terms of the what's happening by by virtue of these technology companies. If I take a
Go ahead. Yeah.
If I take a sneak peek, from a future perspective, I would, again, limiting myself to healthcare from a delivery diagnosis perspective. I think 5G is going to play a very, very important role, as we usher ourselves into that area. I remember Qualcomm, saying that buffering will be thing of past. I mean, with the current infrastructure that we have, it takes hours, for the doctors to send large imaging files, to a specialist. Once health facilities, and I'm purposely kind of limiting my narrative around 5G, once these facilities switch to 5G networks, the transmission process will just take a couple of minutes. Some of the practical examples, and these are a little audacious, I would say, but not, I mean, this audacity will, I believe, come into practice in another few years. Clinicians, could soon use ultra reliable communication connections to teleport themselves to virtual environments and perform robotic surgeries. Augmented reality. I was speaking to one of our thought leaders, Vijay. He shared with me that augmented reality glasses would allow first responders to connect with faraway specialists and show them exactly what they are seeing in order to receive better guidance. We are talking about technological advances, 5G, also supporting medical training, enabling students to use virtual reality headsets to practice at their own pace the steps of complex surgeries. We're talking about drones, delivering life-saving medicines or devices to the patients in hard-to-reach rural areas. A university in Sweden is already testing, these 5G-enabled drones to deliver defibrillators to cardiac arrest victims. So yes, I mean, there's a lot of disruption that we are seeing coming ahead from a healthcare delivery. perspective. And these are some of the examples or some of the predictions. But if I can make, teleporting is definitely one big thing which is being facilitated.
You mentioned about, and that's also a question we have about this whole robotic assisted surgery. And on one side, again, we have surgeons. The other side, we have robots. And again, that fear factor also comes into the play for the patients, kind of a thing. But how do you see this thing getting evolved over the next few years?
I think robotic assisted surgery, to best of my knowledge, has significantly evolved over the period of time. We do see some of the most complex, and I'm talking about surgeries, brain surgeries and all, being currently done by these surgeons. And again, if the question is more about what is the role of the surgeons going to be. See, when we talk about robotic assisted surgeries, we are talking about robotic assisted surgeries. We are not talking about robotic surgeries as of today. And what robotics assisted surgery means.
As a human being, we don't look into semantics, so that's why. It just happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's about instead of me holding the caliper and getting onto the patient, it's a robot which is doing that, and I'm controlling, as a surgeon, I'm controlling that robot, from behind the console. So we are moving away from those traditional surgeons, who would perform the surgery by themselves, to the more informed, technologically savvy surgeons who are using robots, for the sheer reason of the what we call as the perfection, to minimize those chances of error, which get converted. At the end of the day, surgeons are human, right? So robots are allowing the surgeries to be much more error-free and much more efficient than what they were. So surgeons are not going anywhere. It's just that their role is going to change from active surgery to conducting a passive surgery by controlling these robots.
Divesh, we could have just carried on with this thing throughout the evening. I just realized it's time. Engaging, enthralling, and absolutely engrossing, if I may call it this session. Beautiful, and I would rather use this term poetic rendition of how this seemingly complex area you demystified in terms of making it simple, but more important, very, very relevant in terms of how AI will create an impact in terms of seemingly not only getting into the thick and thin in terms of the various aspects of healthcare, but providing a very incisive, insightful approach for humanity. Take out all these rules, regulations, which the governments will take care and the stakeholders. More important is humanity cannot do without AI intervention in healthcare. And that's exactly what you proved in the last 60 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. Really kind of appreciate it. I got wonderful kind of a, let's say, understanding from your session. And thank you very much for participating. Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks.